Very well. Now let me show you how to configure Azure as a service provider, this time via PowerShell to set up federated access for both Microsoft 365 and also for Azure. First of all, this PowerShell will modify the current authentication from managed to federated to allow for that Oracle IDCS IDaaS federation. And please note, this does require authentication and proper authorization, which is achieved by using the connect-mosl service PowerShell command. To simplify the command, I'll set some variables for DOM, brand, MEX, URL, logon URL, URI, logout URL, protocol, and cert. And I'll briefly explain each one of those here as I set these variables. But this makes it a lot easier to run the very large command in order to accomplish this. So in Windows PowerShell ISE, I can simply highlight each variable and execute them one by one to set those variables. And I'll explain each of them as I go through this. DOM is for the domain name, brand is for the federation brand name, MEX is for the metadata exchange URI, URL is for the active logon URI, logon URL is for the passive logon URI, URI is for the issuer URI, logout URL is for the logoff URI, and protocol is for the preferred authentication method protocol, that is, in this case SAML WSFed, and then cert is for the signing certificate. Now each of these actually are well defined in the documentation for Microsoft, so if you need further information, of course you can look there. Also remember, these are all identified and defined in the IDCS metadata.xml file. Once I have the variable set, I can then execute the one-line command to change authentication from managed to federated, and that's using the set mosl domain authentication, so I simply highlight it and execute it. After I run the set command, then I can verify by executing the command get mosl domain to see the end result. And you'll see here in a moment that basically it will be changed from managed to federated. Now to view all the settings I previously set up, I can also run the command get mosl domain federation settings hyphen domain name followed by the actual domain that I'm trying to look for. And that returns the current configuration for this federated domain entry. Also, very similar to what I described with Google, with Azure user and group creation, you can synchronize your local Active Directory and the Azure Active Directory by using the Azure AD Connect, as I'm showing here. Synchronization, as you see here in the documentation, is responsible for creating users, groups, and other objects from your on-premise Active Directory into Azure Active Directory. Now note, this is very common for those of you like me dealing with a hybrid environment. And this visual describes the process of that synchronization between an on-premise Active Directory and your Azure Active Directory. Now let me show you how to configure the identity provider in the Oracle IDCS IDaaS admin console. Now many of the IDaaS solutions may also provide an advantage of using their console to set up the IDP using a catalog of different applications using a template. In this case, Oracle IDCS provides a template named Microsoft Office 365. After I find MS Office 365, I can select Add, and then I can go through the wizard here to show you what it looks like. This is where you can provide a name and description along with custom login and logout URLs. You can set up SSO configuration and even provisioning from within this application template. Now I'm going to cancel this and show you a result from a prior execution with this example, Students 0365. Similar to what we saw before, we're going to give it a name, a description, a custom login URL, which is a little different, custom logout URL, and a custom error URL. And then under the SSO configuration tab, I've set the name ID to email address and also the value for that to email address as well. Under the attribute configuration, or generically the attribute profile, I've set the user principal name, otherwise known as UPN, to a specific attribute as defined here. And I've also set the immutable ID, in this case as an expression. Now in this case, we've also extended the directory to include a unique identifier for that immutable ID, and that's a requirement from Microsoft. Now I could also use Oracle IDCS to provision the user accounts, but in this case, I chose to use Azure AD Connect to synchronize from our on-premise Active Directory to Azure AD. Alright, with everything set up, I can now show you the login process with SAML Tracer inside Firefox. First, I navigate to portal.azure.com. Similar to GCP, at the sign-in prompt, I enter my email address to identify the user account and then select Next. Azure then redirects me to my login page, and with a custom login page here, I enter my username and my password. Now, just like with the GCP example, I've actually embedded the multi-factor authentication into the login process with Duo, a really awesome feature by using the Duo integration with the IDaaS solutions out there. And of course, it's successful, naturally, and I'm now logged into the Azure console. So now let's look at the detailed evidence in the SAML trace. Now in the SAML trace, after finding the WS-Fed SAML entry, I'm going to select the SAML tab, and then I'm going to find that immutable ID and the UPN in the SAML assertion, which of course is required for this federated partnership. Quite amazing, quite dazzling, don't you think?